Might be a little rough out the Golden Gate Bridge. If it is, use caution moving about the vessel. Use the handrails, take a seat. No standing on the benches at any time for any reason. Different note, full service snack bar on the main deck. Beer, wine, cocktails, lots of drink specials. Chips, candy, soda, juices, water, coffee, tea, hot chocolate. So head on down the main deck snack bar. Enjoy the ride.
We are now leaving Fisherman's Wharf behind. Right now, we're passing a number of interesting sights. His doors and headed for the gold fields himself. But the town didn't stay deserted for long. Young people from all over the world came here to San Francisco. In just 2 years, the population skyrocketed from 500 to 25,000. Look back at the city. Life in San Francisco was truly wild and willing. At the heart of the madness was a stretch of try to imagine it not being there. When plans for the bridge were first proposed, many said it couldn't be built. Some even said it shouldn't be built. Early environmentalists didn't like the idea of a bridge they believed would ruin the natural beauty of the Golden Gate. American author Catherine Gerald was one of many who expressed opposition at the time.
When you have one of the most romantic approaches in all geography, why spoil it? In the interest of your own uniqueness, dear San Francisco, do not bridge the Golden Gate.
The War Department in Washington, D.C. objected by claiming that it would be a serious hazard to airplane navigation. Well, despite the protests, there were many people who wanted the bridge. First among the supporters was the engineer, Joseph Behrman Strauss. He not only designed the bridge, he was obsessed with it. He wasn't a man to give in to an engineering challenge or political opposition. Encouraged by Strauss, the voters in the region approved the bridge. Construction began in 1933.
The design that was finally developed actually turned out to be one of the most graceful and delicate objects of Art Deco art that was ever created, and the scale is just immense. The towers are over 700 feet in height, the main span 4,200 feet long. No one had ever built a bridge like this before. Some people say you can never build it again.
Look at the tower at the San Francisco end of the bridge. Then look down at the concrete foundation the tower is standing on. This was the first great challenge, building a concrete pier in water more than 100 feet deep. Enormous temporary walls were built, enclosing an area in the bay the size of a football field. The water was pumped out, and the concrete was poured. Next came the two towers. When they were completed, thousands of steel strands were bundled together to form the enormous main cables that connect them. Finally, the road itself was built, starting at both ends and working toward the middle to keep the bridge in balance. It's easy to describe. It was far from easy to accomplish. Imagine working there, day after day, in the cold, in the fog, in the rain. On major construction projects in those days, experience had shown that one workman usually died for every $1 million spent. The budget for the bridge was $35 million, but Joseph Strauss was determined that 35 lives would not be lost on his bridge. A safety net was fabricated and suspended below the workmen, and although 11 men did die during construction, 19 men fell into the safety net and were saved. Those 19 lucky men formed a very special club. It's called the department would not permit, which the rocky foundation of the pier base would not support, which would have no traffic to justify it, which would ruin the beauty of the Golden Gate, stands before you in all its majestic splendor, in complete refutation of every attack made upon it. Look up at the Twin Towers. They rise nearly 750 feet above the water. Let your eyes follow the bridge from shore to shore. The roadway extends for 1.25 miles without touching down on solid ground. Look at the two main cables. There's enough wire there to wrap around the planet 3 times. Each strand in the cables is secured with steel reinforcements in a 50,000-ton foundation buried deep underground. Impressive numbers, but numbers alone can't tell the story of the Golden Gate Bridge. There is more to it than steel and concrete. For many, it has become a symbol of America's hope, as inspiring and recognizable as the Statue of Liberty.
When you're standing on that deck, you can feel it vibrate. You can feel it sway back and forth in the wind. The entire bridge hums like a harpsichord, like and it makes you feel very small. And standing looking up at those huge towers and listening to the whole thing moaning in the wind, it's awe-inspiring.
That name, by the way, came long before the bridge. John C. Fremont, a soldier, explorer, and adventurer, named the entrance to San Francisco Bay the Golden Gate back in 1846. That was even before gold was discovered in California.
Well, that's weird, because I thought it was because of the gold.
Look to the north end of the Golden Gate Bridge, the side opposite San Francisco, and you'll see a rocky point with a building on it, just below the bridge. That's Lime Point, the other side of the Golden Gate's entrance, along with Fort Point. Look again at the hills to the left of Lime Point, the Marin Headlands. Spend an afternoon on the hiking trails there, and you might see deer or even bobcats. Climb to the top of Hawk Hill any time of the year, and you'll have a glorious view of the Golden Gate. Visit in October, and you'll see magnificent birds of prey. Every in the world. And it's caused by the winds that just howl into the Golden Gate, the mix of waters trying to force their way into the harbor and also out simultaneously. The more churned up, the better. But it's not for amateurs. Quake was bad, but the real disaster was the fire that followed. Look at the pointed spire of the Transamerica Pyramid near downtown. Imagine that entire area engulfed in flames. And not just a firestorm. It burned for 3 days and 2 nights. By the time the fire burned itself out, much of San Francisco's once proud downtown was little more than rubble. 28,000 buildings have been destroyed. and 250,000 people were homeless. Tens of thousands of San Franciscans lived for months in tents while the city was rebuilt. The damage was awesome. But in just 3 years, 20,000 new buildings went up, and San Francisco was back on its feet again. Its citizens knew that their city could survive just about anything. The Great Quake of 1906, San Francisco's worst earthquake, was certainly not the first, and unfortunately, not the last. Look out the windows toward the city and the Marina District. The earth shook again in October 1989, and it was the Marina District that suffered the greatest damage in that quake. The man-made land reclaimed from the bay rolled like ocean waves, and buildings collapsed into rubble. Stuart Brand was driving his car there when the earthquake struck.
I just happened to be driving down Marina Boulevard. Suddenly I thought the steering had gone out of my car as I was swaying from lane to lane.
Lee Kang Wong was also here during the quake of 1989, which struck right about dinner time.
I was just about ready to cook my rice, and all of a sudden, the walls and the chandelier began to tremble, and my husband yelled at me, "There's an earthquake." I just got under with the dining table and turned off all the electricity, and we didn't have dinner that night.
After the gold rush, San Francisco grew into a cosmopolitan city with impressive the one and only Alcatraz Island. It's directly ahead. Once, the only creatures that lived on that barren rock were flocks of pelicans. In fact, that's where Alcatraz got its name. The Spanish named the island after the pelicans, Los Alcatrazes. The U.S. Army decided Alcatraz Island was the perfect place for a fort to defend the bay from invaders. But this cold and windy rock was such an unpleasant place that they changed their minds. It was now the perfect place for a military prison, and eventually a federal penitentiary. It was a time when gangsters were becoming heroes to people. The government needed to send a message that crime did not pay, so they created Alcatraz, the very last stop in the country's prison system, the place to send the worst criminals of all.
Yeah, my name is Leon Whitey Thompson. My number was 1465, AZ 1465.
Listen carefully now. You're about to hear from former inmates, guards, and residents of The Rock to tell you their stories themselves.
I was a man that had total hatred in them days. I hated anything that walked the crawl on this earth. And when you got a man like that in prison, you got to get rid of him. And that's what they did. They shipped me to Alcatraz.
These were hard men, kidnappers, bank robbers, killers, men so dangerous that when the first batch arrived by train in 1934, not one was allowed to step down onto free soil. They simply loaded the train cars, one by one, onto barges, and floated them out to the island with the inmates chained up inside. Rumor was that if a man died on Alcatraz, his corpse would leave the same way, stone cold dead, but in chains. With men like these, you could never be too careful. The building you see on top of the hill was the inmates' new home, the Alcatraz cell house. One described it as a tomb of living souls. Some would stay for a year, others for 20 or 25 years or more. To get an idea of the accommodations inside, go ahead and reach your arms out as far as you can from side to side. That's how wide an Alcatraz cell is, only 5 feet across. Now reach your hands up high above your head. That's how tall, and only a bit longer from end to end. The cell house might look huge from here, but it was never completely filled. No more than 300 inmates lived inside at any time. 300. They could all fit on this boat ride today. Notice the circular water tower. Alcatraz is surrounded by water, but on the island itself, not a drop. Fresh water had to come from San Francisco, and not by any pipeline. 2 or 3 times a week, a barge arrived, full of 180,000 gallons of fresh water. It was pumped up into that tank. The tall smokestack marks the Alcatraz powerhouse. One thing that couldn't be brought out here by boat was electricity, so they made their own. One young man was only 21 years old when he first climbed onto the Rock. His name was Frank Heaney, and he was a guard. In fact, the youngest guard ever to serve on Alcatraz.
I had a very difficult time. They really took advantage of my age. The old saying that misery loves company, you know, they were very miserable, so they like to make you miserable too. They had no tailor-made cigarettes, they had no candy bars, chewing gum, soft drinks, radios, television, newspapers, rolls, or rehabilitation programs. They had none of that by being sent to Alcatraz.
Men sent to Alcatraz considered themselves the elite among convicts.
But on the Rock, you know, I'm not trying to put a feather in my hat or nothing, but they had a lot of class.
You could say they were a higher caliber of criminal. They were more or less professionals, people who robbed mail trucks and banks and so forth. Some were in for murder. They were a cut above average, the average criminal.
Robert Strout, the Birdman, Al Capone, Mickey Cohen, Frankie Garbo, Machine Gun Kelly. They're just another stupid fool like I was, and that's the way most of the Indicons felt about, because everybody was the same on the Rock.
Nobody learned that faster than Alphonse Big Al Capone, Mr. Scarface himself. Capone ruled like a king in any other prison, but here on the Rock, he mopped floors just like anybody else. With no one to protect him, Capone was a sitting duck. The big man was roughed up, beaten, and even stabbed. But Capone had carried his real temper with him to Alcatraz. A case of untreated syphilis was eating his brain and slowly driving him insane. He ended up locked in the bug cage, the fenced-off section of the hospital for mental patients. Still the tough guy, Capone fought with his forte, not with guns or knives, but with bedpans, full bedpans. Afterwards, the once mighty crime czar had to be washed off with a hose. Look up ahead at the 3-story guards barracks above the landing dock. You'll also see a metal frame tower at the right corner of the dock.
The tower that you see in front of us is the dock tower. It was manned 24 hours a day. It had a large group of weapons, had a 30-06 rifle, 30 caliber rifle, tear gas gun, 38 revolver. Men were shot and killed from the tower.
One officer would sit up on the top of that tiny tower, 75 feet above the island, locked in for 8 hours at a time, watching. Just watching. No matter what kind of weather.
Sometimes you thought you were in heaven. When the fog would come in, you could hardly see.
George DiVincenzi was an Alcatraz guard in the 50s.
I was in the dock tower the day that they closed the Golden Gate Bridge. They had over 100-mile-an-hour gales, and I'm on that dock tower, and it was swinging and swaying like Sammy Kaye's music. The water in the commode was spinning around, the tower was shaking, and I says, my God, if this goes over, I'm going to end up in a bay, locked up in this cage.
On the walls of the guards' barracks, you can still see writing from the Indian occupation of 1969 to 1971. Look for the words Indian Land and Indians Welcome. A group of 89 Native Americans claimed the island and held out here for 2 years. Historian John Martini is here to explain what happened.
They claimed Alcatraz under an old treaty that said that male members of the Great Sioux Nation could homestead unused excess federal property. The first time in nearly a century when Indians of all tribes had gathered together for a common purpose.
In the end, the Indians were forced off the island. They were probably the only inhabitants of Alcatraz ever to leave unwillingly. Up the hill, you can see a partially destroyed building with open, empty windows. This was once a luxurious Spanish mission-style mansion, home to the Alcatraz warden. It burned in a fire that broke out during the Indian occupation. All that is left is this battered shell. Looking at these cliffs passing by, you can get a close-up view of why Alcatraz is called the Rock. When the army first arrived, the island was so barren that there weren't even any plants. There wasn't any dirt for them to grow in. Soil had to be imported here from Angel Island before anything bloomed on the Rock. It didn't take long for someone to try to escape from Alcatraz. Just 2 years after the prison opened, guards saw a lone man struggling over a wire fence. They took aim, and he fell to his death into the bay. There's no definite proof that any prisoner ever escaped Alcatraz alive. But that didn't keep desperate men from trying, 36 of them in all.
You cannot take away from a man the thought that he wants his freedom.
I could see out the window at nighttime, and you could see kind of over by the Berkeley coastline there, and you could see all the lights over there.
There's life. There's everything I want in my life, and it's there. It's a mile or a mile and a half away, and yet I can't get to it.
That wide open area just past the cell house is the prison exercise yard. Once a week, on Sunday, inmates were allowed out in the yard. For just 2 hours, life there could seem normal. They could sit in the sun, read, maybe play a game of softball with friends.
Occasionally, some guy would get exuberant and knock the ball over the wall. But if you knock the ball over the wall, you're out. It's not a home run, and you can't go to the other side to get it either.
That long, white two-story building was the prison industries.
There were a number of attempted escapes that started from that building. There was one incident where the inmates got to the top of the building. You'll see a small tower there. They were going to attack that tower. The officer spotted them, and he shot and killed one and wounded another, and the other was captured.
The whole top floor of the industries building was a laundry. Alcatraz inmates washed uniforms for all the armed forces around the Bay Area. The laundry arrived on an army boat and was delivered by soldiers. That gave one very smart inmate an idea. Slowly and patiently, he began to collect bits and pieces of uniforms as they made their way through the laundry. And when I say patient, I mean it. It took him 10 years to do it, but he finally collected a complete Army uniform, dog tags and all. Armed with nothing more than a Texaco map and a few dollars in change, he calmly strolled down to the dock and walked onto the boat with the rest of the soldiers. He made it as far as Angel Island. Alcatraz guards were there to meet him with a pair of handcuffs, and he quietly rowed the boat back to the Rock. One guard captain said he kind of felt sorry for the guy. He should have won an award for his efforts. Today, names like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud the Birdman are world famous. But other Alcatraz inmates were equally evil, though their names might be forgotten. Like Billy Cook. He murdered 12 people in cold blood.
Oh, Billy Cook. I never liked him. He spit in my face once.
George DiVincenzi.
He killed a mother and a father and 3 children and threw them down a well. He was given 300 years and put on Alcatraz. And talk about a psychopath, he was one. Because he killed a California Highway Patrol officer, they gave him the death penalty, and he was executed at San Quentin. So I took a busman's holiday and went over there and watched him get executed. He was an animal as far as I'm concerned.
Think about your first day on the job, or maybe your first day at a new school. I'll bet it was nothing like George DiVincenzi's first day on Alcatraz.
I reported 9 o'clock Monday morning, and I was told to go to the barbershop. I was the barbershop officer. This one inmate the barber proceeded to give his first customer a haircut. And as he was giving him a haircut, they were conversing in low tones very intimately. I could not quite figure what was going on. And as the haircut proceeded, the conversation got more intense. Next thing you know, the customer who was getting the haircut got up out of the chair, and the barber lunged at him with these big barber shears about 10 inches long. He got him in the neck, in the heart, in the throat. Down he went, blood flying all over the place. And me, like a damn fool, blowing the whistle, I jumped in trying to separate him. Well, the three of us spun around, knocked the barber chair over, knocked another cabinet over, and he kept hitting him with these scissors. Of course, he was dead within less than a minute. Needless to say, that was the end of the shears in the barber shop. They went to electric clippers after that. That was my introduction to Alcatraz, my first day.
It was said that the cold waters and deadly currents of the bay made Alcatraz virtually escape-proof. Prisoners might break out of the cell block, but getting off the island was an almost impossible challenge. In 1958, two men decided it was worth the risk to brave the freezing bay water. The idea of it sends chills right up my spine. Why, imagine seeing prisoners swimming towards our boat right now. You see, in this story, two men made it out of the cell block and into the water. One inmate was captured and taken back to his cell. He lived to tell the story of his attempt. His partner in the escape wasn't so lucky.
I recall getting that water, and it was like a shock. It was just like a, how should you say, suddenly thrust into an icebox. We was going to hide among the rocks there until nightfall, and then shove off. But I got caught up with about 15 minutes before dark. On every escape, when a man's missing, the Coast Guard comes out and goes around, and the prison boat circles. They both circle, looking all along the shoreline for anybody, you know. I had originally planned to be underwater with the snorkel. I lost what I needed. I lost the snorkel to keep myself underwater. And for that reason, I think I failed on it.
If he had been able to hide until dark, he would have had a long, cold swim ahead of him.
And I was more or less hoping to go to Point Richmond, which is about, I think, 8 miles or so. And I had a plastic bag to keep myself afloat. And the only thing I was concerned, how long could you stand it in that water without being unconscious? Need Navy heavy underwear. And I guess that's why the man, they tell me, that's why the guy that was with me died. He drowned because of that heavy underwear. It weighs like concrete.
Once an inmate makes it to shore, you're not home free. I mean, that's the start of your adventure. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You'd get caught. In fact, you'd turn yourself in. You'd be so on, you'd say, you know, I just escaped from Alcatraz. I want some help.
Life was hard on the rock. But if it was too hard, the prisoners would riot. One way to keep them happy, feed them well. On the menu, there was porterhouse steak with snowflake potatoes, southern fried chicken, or grilled fillet of perch with a lemon wedge and buttered